Roger, liftoff and the clock has started. Yes, sir, reading you loud and clear.
Roger, roll, Discovery.
Discovery, Roger, go from.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the June 3, 2020 edition of Space News. This is Peter Auld, and tonight I'm joined by Tina Stagg and Michael Abdullah, and we're all from the Space Association of Australia. Well, let's get started with some Australian space news. An Australian company has completed its acquisition of a Silicon Valley startup as it plans a satellite communications constellation. Electro-Optic Systems Holdings completed its acquisition of Odyssey, a startup that planned a satellite system to provide data relay services for other satellites. EOS plans to invest $800 million to create the EOS Link satellite communications constellation and will award manufacturing and launch contracts for the initial 4 satellites by early next year. Now EOS can move quickly to the deployment phase of the first EOS Link constellation comprising 4 satellites, EOS Group CEO Ben Green said. The size, capability and the cost of these satellites has been scaled to meet the requirements of initial customers. Over the next 6 months, we will complete the satellite design sufficient to allow the award of build and launch contracts by early 2021. And the next mission of the University of New South Wales Canberra Space, the M2 Pathfinder CubeSat, is scheduled to launch on this month's Rocket Lab Mission 12, Don't Stop Me Now. The M2 Pathfinder satellite, a collaboration between UNSW Canberra Space and the Australian Government, will test communications architecture and other technologies that will assist in informing the future space capabilities of Australia. Specifically, this satellite will demonstrate the ability of an onboard software-based radio to operate and reconfigure while in orbit. And moving over to New Zealand, Rocket Lab will resume Electron launches this month as New Zealand eases its pandemic lockdown. The company has rescheduled an Electron launch called Don't Stop Me Now for June 11 from its New Zealand launch site. That launch, which is carrying 1 satellite for NASA, 3 US National Reconnaissance Office payloads, and 2 student-built CubeSats, including the UNSW Canberra Space M2 Pathfinder, was scheduled for late March but was postponed when the New Zealand government imposed severe restrictions on business and other activities to limit the spread of COVID-19. Rocket Lab said it would continue to use enhanced health and safety processes for employees working on this launch, including physical distancing, split shifts and enhanced cleaning. And it's over to you, Tina.
Thanks, Peter, and good evening, space fans.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Ignition. Liftoff of the Falcon 9 and Crew Dragon. Go NASA, go SpaceX, Godspeed, Bob and Doug.
America has launched. And so rises a new era of American spaceflight, and with it the ambitions of a new generation continuing the dream. 20 seconds into flight, stage 1 propulsion is nominal.
T plus 30 seconds into this historic mission. Flying crew on board Dragon and Falcon 9, and look at them go.
In exciting NASA commercial crew program news, SpaceX launched astronauts for the first time at the weekend, making history and opening a new age of commercial spaceflight. A Falcon 9 rocket lifted off from historic Pad 39A at NASA's Kennedy Space Center, carrying SpaceX's Crew Dragon capsule into orbit and again successfully landing the first stage on a drone ship in the Atlantic. The launch kicked off SpaceX's landmark Demo 2 test mission to send NASA astronauts Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley to the International Space Station. Demo 2 marked the return of orbital human spaceflight from US soil after a nearly decade-long absence and signalled the beginning of a new era in space exploration, one led by commercial companies. It was incredible, Hurley radioed SpaceX's launch control. Appreciate all the hard work and thanks for a great ride to space.
Well,
everyone. Welcome aboard Dragon. My name is Doug. Next to me is Bob. You probably know him. We're so glad to be with you this evening and welcome you on board Dragon. Got a couple things we want to talk about first before we kind of show you around. The first is kind of a tradition we've had over the years with spacecraft going way back to the Mercury era, and then a tradition that's been carried on ever since with all our space vehicles, including the Soyuz. We're given the honor to name this capsule. I know most of you at SpaceX especially know it as Capsule 206, but I think all of us thought that we could maybe do a little bit better than that. So without further ado, we would like to welcome you aboard Capsule Endeavour. We chose Endeavour for a few reasons. One, because of this incredible endeavor NASA, SpaceX, and the United States has been on since the end of the shuttle program back in 2011. The other reason we named it Endeavour is a little more personal to Bob and I. We both had our first flights on Shuttle Endeavour, and it just meant so much to us to carry on that name. That's what we decided to go with. So we hope you enjoy that name, and once again, welcome on board.
The Dragon spacecraft was named Endeavour, which links both Apollo with the Apollo 15 command module called by the same name, and the shuttle spacecraft with the new commercial crew program. After rendezvous with the station, the astronauts successfully tested the Dragon spacecraft's manual controls. Endeavour then performed a flawless automatic docking to the ISS less than 19 hours after launch, with the crew entering the station a couple of hours later. Their arrival on station came with a little drama, as Hurley banged his head coming through the hatch, causing some minor bleeding. But the incident did little to dampen the astronauts' enthusiasm as they captured the flag as the first crew to reach the ISS from the United States since the last space shuttle mission in 2011.
Yeah, so this is the flag that we left here almost 9 years ago on STS-135. It had actually flown on STS-1, and then it flew again with us on STS-135. And at some point after the end of the shuttle program, we decided we would have a little friendly competition to see who came up and got this flag. And congratulations, SpaceX, you got the flag.
The current and former NASA administrators have praised each other for their work on the commercial crew program. NASA Administrator Jim Bridenstine said at a briefing last week that his predecessor, Charles Bolden, did absolutely magnificent work winning support for the commercial crew program despite initial opposition from many in Congress. Bolden, in a separate call later in the day, said that Bridenstine was working out to be a great administrator. Bolden and former Senator Bill Nelson spoke on a call organised by the presidential campaign of Joe Biden, and they said Biden, as Vice President, had supported the commercial crew program. But they declined to speculate about what a Biden administration might do differently in space policy. And back to the International Space Station, a Japanese cargo ship arrived at the ISS last week. The HTV-9 spacecraft was grappled by the station's robotic arm and burst to the station's Harmony module. The cargo ship delivered several tons of supplies to the station, including a final set of new batteries for the station's power system. The arrival also allowed the Demo 2 commercial crew mission to proceed with launch. And turning to the US Army, the Army has signed an agreement with SpaceX to test the company's Starlink broadband constellation. The Army and SpaceX finalised a Cooperative Research and Development Agreement, or CRADA, last month, allowing the Army to test Starlink over the next 3 years. CRADAs are commonly used by the military to evaluate technologies and services from the private sector before it commits to buying them. The Army will seek answers to key questions such as what ground equipment it will need to use Starlink and how much systems integration work could be required. And over to Michael.
Thank you, Tina. And let's turn to Europe. The European Space Agency has awarded Airbus a contract to build the third Orion service module. The contract covers construction of the Orion service module for the Artemis 3 mission, which will send astronauts to the Moon in 2024 under NASA's current schedule. The contract, valued at $274 million, was expected since Airbus built the service module for the Artemis 1 Orion mission and has been working on the Artemis 2 service module. ESA is developing the Orion service module under an agreement with NASA tied to the ISS partnership. And moving to Russia. The head of Russian space agency Roscosmos says he will not race the United States back to the Moon. In an interview last week, Dmitry Rogozin said Russia would not participate in some lunar race that resembles some election competition between Republicans and Democrats in the United States. Russia has previously signalled interest in participating in the Lunar Gateway, but unlike fellow ISS partners Canada, Europe and Japan, has not made a formal commitment. Russia has its own program of robotic lunar missions, including sample return, but those missions have suffered years of delays. And turning to China. China is planning 11 missions over the next 2 years to assemble its space station. The first module for the Chinese space station will launch next year, said Zhao Jinping, chief designer of China's human spaceflight program, at a political conference last week. This will be followed by a crewed Shenzhou flight and Tianzhou cargo mission. The first of 2 experiment modules will then launch for docking with Tianhe. China is preparing to select a new class of astronauts to support those space station missions that will include as many as 18 people, both military pilots as well as civilian scientists and engineers. The new selection round follows 2 previous astronaut classes in the 1990s and 2010. Meanwhile, the rocket for China's Mars mission has arrived at the launch site. The components of the Long March 5 rocket arrived at the Wenchang launch site on the island of Hainan last week. The rocket will launch the Tianwen-1 mission in late July, sending an orbiter, lander and rover to Mars. Tianwen-1 will arrive at Mars in February 2021 and enter orbit, but the landing attempt may not take place until weeks or months later. And turning to commercial space news, SpaceX's latest Starship prototype exploded just after an engine test last week, erupting in a dramatic fireball. The Starship SN4 prototype exploded at SpaceX's test facility near Boca Chica, Texas. The explosion occurred about a minute after a short test of its Raptor rocket engine, but it was unclear what caused the conflagration. Several of the Starship prototypes have exploded, but SpaceX CEO Elon Musk has said the company is committed to learning from each test and forging ahead. And back to Peter.
Thanks, Michael. And Virgin Orbit's first Launcher 1 rocket failed to make it to orbit last week. The rocket, carried aloft by the company's Boeing 747 aircraft, was released off the coast of Southern California. The rocket's Newton 3 first-stage engine ignited and fired for several seconds before an anomaly caused it to shut down, terminating the mission. The cause of the anomaly was not immediately known, company officials said, but they emphasised that the flight had been proceeding smoothly up until that point, including release and ignition. The schedule for the next launch attempt will depend on the outcome of an investigation and any additional testing or modifications required. But before the launch, the company had expected to perform 1 or 2 more Launcher 1 missions this year. And finally this week, a film starring Tom Cruise that will reportedly be filmed in space now has a director, but still no studio or schedule. Doug Liman, who worked with the actor on films Edge of Tomorrow and American Made, had reportedly agreed to direct the film as well as write the script and serve as producer alongside Cruise. NASA confirmed several weeks ago it is working with Cruise on a movie, but offered no details. The film doesn't have a studio attached, and filming can't begin until after Cruise completes filming of the next 2 Mission Impossible movies. And that's all for this week. Thank you, Michael and Tina, and we'll talk to you again next week. Bye now.